Commentary on Genesis 4:17 to 24. After Abram's victory over the coalition of kings, he returned with the people and possessions that had been taken captive. At the valley of Shaveh, two kings met him, the king of Sodom and Melchizedek, the king of Salem. These two encounters present two very different kingdoms and two very different ways of living before God. The king of peace. Melchizedek brought out bread and wine and blessed Abram, saying, open quote, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth." Close quote. This is the first appearance of a priest in Scripture. He comes without any recorded genealogy, ancestry, or succession. Later, the writer of Hebrews would identify him as a picture of an eternal priesthood, one that does not depend upon the Levitical system, but upon God's own appointment. The bread and wine anticipate God's provision rather than man's effort. Abram had won a battle, yet Melchizedek reminds him that the victory came from God. And blessed be the Most High God, who hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. The blessing came before any demand for performance. God's provision and victory are presented as gifts rather than wages earned by human achievement. Abram's tithe. Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. This event occurred centuries before the law of Moses was established. It was not a legal obligation, but a voluntary response of gratitude. Abram was not attempting to gain God's favor. He had already received God's promises in earlier chapters. His giving was the fruit of blessing, not the means of obtaining it. The account demonstrates that worship flows from what God has done, rather than from an attempt to secure his acceptance. Two kings, two offers. The king of Sodom offered Abram the goods of the battle. Give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself. Abram refused. He declared that he had lifted his hand to the Lord, the Most High God, and would not take even a thread or a sandal strap from the king of Sodom. Abram understood that God's promises could not be improved by worldly alliances. He would not allow anyone to claim responsibility for the blessings that belonged to God alone. The contrast is striking. Melchizedek came with bread, wine, blessing, and thanksgiving. The king of Sodom came with material wealth and the possibility of earthly recognition. Abram chose the kingdom represented by Melchizedek over the kingdom represented by Sodom. The greater Melchizedek. This passage ultimately points beyond Abram to Jesus Christ. The priesthood established under Moses was temporary and dependent upon continual sacrifices. The priesthood foreshadowed by Melchizedek is everlasting. Christ did not become a priest because of tribal descent, but because of the power of an endless life. His work is complete. His sacrifice does not need repetition. His ministry continually secures the blessings of the covenant for his people. The bread and wine carried by Melchizedek foreshadow the fellowship and peace that would be fully revealed through Christ's finished work. The possessor of heaven and earth. Melchizedek repeatedly calls God the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. This title reminds the reader that everything belongs to God. Human kingdoms rise and fall, but God's kingdom remains. The promises given to Abram were never dependent upon earthly powers. They were secured by the God who owns all things and who faithfully accomplishes his purposes. The unfolding story of Scripture reveals that God brought his covenant plan to its intended fulfillment through Christ, establishing the everlasting kingdom promised to Abraham. The shadows of the old covenant gave way to the substance, and the temporary priesthood yielded to the eternal priest who reigns forever. The faith of Abram. Abram's refusal of Sodom's wealth reveals a heart resting in God's promise. He trusted that what God had sworn was better than what the world could offer. Genesis 14, verse 17 to 24, therefore presents a beautiful picture of God's covenant faithfulness. The priest king of Salem blesses Abram with bread and wine, receives a grateful offering, and points forward to the greater priest king who would bring lasting peace. Abram's confidence in God's provision demonstrates that the inheritance of God's people rests not upon human achievement or earthly alliances, but upon the faithfulness of the one who possesses heaven and earth and who keeps every promise he has made.